Sounds good. All right. Well, thank you all for taking the time. I really appreciate it. We've got a small group here today, but I think that is going to, as we had discussed before the recording started, have a little bit more dialogue, and we'll see where that goes. So, thanks again, everybody, for joining, and I hope that you find this useful. And again, let me. Sorry, I don't know if you all have used Zoom with sharing with multiple monitors, but it sort of plays Where's Waldo and hides the controls when you share across a different screen and changes the size and puts them over in the corner. So can you see my screen okay?
Yes.
Okay, very good. I know you all have seen a lot of PowerPoint throughout the day. I think that is a standard occupational hazard. So this is PowerPoint, but I think it'll still be quite good for everybody. So I'm going to use this again as a backdrop, but because of the size of the audience, please jump in with any questions that you have. We really can make this a dialogue with the time that we've got. What I plan on discussing is why generative AI and the VMO, talking a little bit about preparing proper prompts, talking about launching the VMO, what the first 30 days are like, breaking it into three different phases of things to consider, some caveats and caution, and then moving forward. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. There is one thing that I realized for this group. Actually, let me go through this and I'll add a little bit more info. So if I'm not connected with you already, if you would like to connect that smart code, I promise it's not a phishing scam. I'm not trying to get any of your money or your Bitcoin or anything. This is just my LinkedIn profile. So if you'd like to connect, feel free to connect. I'd love to connect on LinkedIn. Um, I am the vice president of consulting at Lightspeed, but most of my work is really helping as a speaker and as an educator. That's what consulting really is to me. It's about helping groups, often with their overall agility, and helping with techniques like the ones that we'll talk about today. 25 plus years, dangerously close to 30 in technology throughout all areas of the SDLC and PDLC. About 6 years was developing and deploying AI, not generative, but AI and natural language processing solutions for a company in Washington State. Also have developed and delivered a number of AI-focused training courses and talks about practical application of generative AI for agile ways of working, etc. And I actively use these tools for real-world tasks. I guess this is a really long way of saying this is not theory, and I'm not trying to sell anything. But this is why I use it, and I want to share some of the things that I find to be helpful with these tools. So again, with the idea being, in an hour or so, will you have some things that you can try in your own context that are real, that aren't, theoretical, not possible, hypotheticals. We've got three people in the waiting room, by the way. So I don't know if something got fixed or if there was, but anyway, we got some folks waiting there, which is good. I have to add this shameless plug. So I'm a native of San Jose, so it's always nice to be back amongst friends in the Bay Area. Um, we won't do any sort of. I'm now in Nevada, so I have to be careful because the A's and the Raiders. So I didn't do that. It's not my fault, and I apologize anyway. So, but you're always welcome in Vegas. So what I wanted to say, though, and this is what I just want to pause for a moment, and this might be a good place to add some dialogue, some conversation. Is does everyone know, in general terms, what a VMO is? Okay, so what I'm talking about today is basically the VMO, a Value Management Office, is the Agile equivalent of what used to be our PMO, our project management office, right? So it's a governance body. It allows us to manage our portfolio of efforts. I won't call them projects because as most of us are moving towards a product based model in one way or the other, moving away from that project construct, even though we have projects, is an important thing. So what we'll be talking about today is really getting kickstarted with those of us who are in a PMO, have a PMO or a similar construct. Maybe you have an agile PMO, but these are some techniques that I'll introduce if you are going down that path, or if you're not now, you may well be in the future for those of us who are in agile ways of working, which is going to be everybody here, you likely will have a construct if you're in an organization of a reasonably large size where your PMO, whether it's called a VMO or not, will have some of these functions. And I'll go through what they are. But that is what the VMO is. And I'll just pause for a moment because it's not necessarily a proprietary term. Scaled Agile uses the idea of an APMO as well. So if the same basic idea, I think they may have actually changed their language to a VMO, but that's the construct, the different elements, especially at the portfolio level. Does that make sense? Any questions on that? Okay. That is the abbreviated version. I'm happy to share more resources if anyone's interested more broadly. But this is truly the getting kickstarted. So I always like to use this owl, at least in every presentation ever. There's generally one of a kitten that you'll see at some point. But if you've ever been in a session with me, you know, and if you haven't, you now are forewarned, you will have these, at least one of these in everyone. So that said, joking aside, why do we use generative AI? I started working and educating on using agile ways of working to roll out our VMO. And it's just a lot of work. It's valuable work. But these changes that we'll be talking about require a lot of expertise in disparate areas. Agile ways of working. So all of us, you're on my other monitor, by the way, if you're wondering why I'm pointing over here, that's all of you. But experts in agile ways of working. And you all are those experts. Maybe you're experts in team, product, initiative, and portfolio level planning. Maybe you are, maybe you're not. But we need this when we want to scale this construct. Maybe you are good, or maybe you're not so good with metrics and reporting, but that's really going to be key. If we talk about moving towards value, we need to be able to understand and quantify and measure what value is. Significant changes ultimately to budgetary and funding models. Maybe you do have this experience, maybe you don't. Staffing and training, I'll just keep clicking through these bullet points. You're kind of getting the point, right? No pun intended. Takes a lot. And few orgs have the necessary individuals. That was sort of the impetus for my wanting to build this out was it's hard. And I've done all of these things, but I've been around a really long time. And I don't know that I do all of them perfectly anyway. But few orgs have this skill set. But even when they do, those folks tend to be pretty busy. I see Kathy smiling. So you're probably one of those folks and you're probably pretty busy. So is Alina. So, but for all of us, I mean, you're experts and you may be able to do all of these things. And if you can, that's awesome. But just because you can doesn't mean that you will actually have the ability to do so based on time and space. So this is why I really wanted a practical way to start using generative AI to roll out your VMO. So that's what we'll talk about. So what I wanted to do before we get into it too much, and again, please feel free to interrupt. We do have a relatively small but mighty group here. So let's have some dialogue. Exactly. But I like to true it back. We're agilists, right? And agile in practices and tools, but we're really agilists probably. We're taking time out of our evenings to listen to somebody talk about agile ways of working. That's some commitment, right? We care about agile as a mindset, as a philosophy, as a way of being, I think. So what I say is, before we get started, like AI isn't inherently in support of or in conflict with agile values. It's like money, it's fungible. It can be good or bad. It just depends on how you use it. But I find that AI in general, and specific in this case, but also in the talk that I did for the group, I think last year, how do we embrace change and uncertainty? That's a key principle, a key construct for us. We can be more efficient and collaborative and adapt our practices to incorporate new AI capabilities and tools. That's part of continuous improvement. That's part of a lot of the work and the principles that we have about the work that we do. So I find AI can be helpful if applied properly. Part of why we're here today, continuous learning and improvement. So AI and keeping up with those advancements, they're woven into our continuous learning principle in agile and lean ways of working. And our iterative approach, and you'll see some of that here today, is that we can incorporate in very sort of small but high value use cases, scenarios, constructs. We can incorporate that iteratively. So we don't have to big bang these things. I realize I just verbed another noun. By big bang, I guess, is now a verb. But that said, like we can do these things in incremental ways that align to the way that we work. Small bits of value delivered regularly and frequently and on an ongoing basis. And then this customer-centric focus. So AI can help us enhance customer experience and outcomes. It really helped be a superpower to accelerate the quality of what we're delivering as well, especially at these things that I'll talk about today, which is doing some things at scale that can be kind of hard to do. So that's how I like to align the mindset in AI. Excuse me. Again, feel free to jump in. You can't have a PowerPoint about AI without some pictures of scared robots. So that's new to the kittens and the owls. But again, this guidance, as well as that last slide, are not unique to today's session. These are things, if you're not using generative AI a lot, these are just some things to sort of get in the habit of. And if you are using it a lot, feel free to jump in and add some other suggestions on anything that I'm saying here. Again, I'm happy to continue talking. It's an occupational hazard that I'm well acquainted with, but I welcome the conversation as well. So with anything that you do, including what I'll show you today, this idea of garbage in, garbage out, right? That term's been around for longer than I've been around, and I've been around for a long time. But the same quality issue is here with generative AI. We want to make sure that we have good and detailed prompts. The more general, vague, and generic we are, the worse responses we're going to get. We want well-crafted prompts. In doing that, we will get more accurate, relevant, and useful results. One of the inherent dangers I have with generative AI in general, no pun intended, is even with the exact same inputs, you don't always get the same outputs, and they see that as a feature, not a bug. I see it the other way around. That said, we can reduce that variability and have some level of confidence in the results for what we're doing, the more specific and concrete and detailed we are. It also helps us to mitigate bias and errors. Again, I think as everyone knows, these models are trained on publicly available data, and I'm sure none of us have run into problems with people being poorly behaved on the broader internet. That's just not a thing that we've ever experienced. But joking aside, there's bias and errors in these models because of how they're built. So we can help preempt and avoid some of that by better prompts. And then context is key to all human conversations, I believe. And AI is no different. The more information we have, the better we can understand the need, the better we can respond. Any thoughts on that one, by the way? Again, we've got a small but mighty group of experts here. Any other thoughts about prompts? Anything else that I missed here that you'd like to add or subtract or multiply or divide?
A little curious about context. So I use AI, I write prompts, I rewrite prompts and all that. And I do a lot of Scrum training, and I just had a person who said, my job's being replaced by AI in the next year. So she was in the class because she's like, I'm an insurance adjuster, but I have to get into tech. I'm like, okay. So it struck me that whatever company, she didn't tell me the company, was really excited that they could replace all these people with AI. And I'm like, well, what about the exceptions? What about, like, so context for me is, I just haven't experienced AI being able to contextually respond to things. I can type a prompt, but that's not being able to put a whole bunch of things together and then respond. I'm curious about your thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, thanks. And when I say context, I've got a couple of examples. Actually, they're in my examples. And when we go through those, please do like jump in and let me know if they make sense. But the context, for example, like one of the examples I think I have on a slide, maybe in another training. Retrospectives, right? So we love retrospectives, right? And if you don't, then we're not friends. But we love retrospectives, and we are friends because we all love retros if they're done well. So if I say, "Hey, Kathy, you're my agile coach. I need to do a retro." If you and I were just talking, I imagine you would ask me some questions. And you would say, hey, thanks. I'm not putting, I guess I'll pay both sides here, but jump in. But like, you'd probably say, well, is this your first retro? Have you been doing them for a while? Like, and I know you are an exceptional consultant and coach here. So you'd ask the questions I'd probably ask, which would be, what's the context behind asking me? Like, I'm honored to help.
Yeah.
Do you do retros? And do you have a guy like me that talks too much and talks over people sometimes? That's context. Do you do retros, but there's no psychological safety? And so people don't talk about the things that are really that they talk about after the meeting. That's the context. Do you do retros and you don't take action on them? That's the context. When I say, now tell me how to do, it's not in this deck, but it's in a different training I did. If I provide that context and I say, I am an agile coach and I'm helping guide a team. If it's their first retro and they've never done it before, and getting them acclimated and setting the right environment versus a psychologically unsafe environment, versus an environment where they talk great, but it's sort of venting and there's no action. Those are three patterns I think all of us have seen, and there's some others. That's when I say context. So then I say, give me some ideas on how to make my next retro more effective. Then it can be, do some stuff in advance. If there's no psychological safety, it'll give you specific guidance unique to that. So the guidance would be real world. Like I did this, so I have some prompts with it and some answers is for that environment and that scenario with that context. It didn't just say, here's some retro formats to try. It said, send out something in advance, make it anonymous, use something like forms where you don't capture the information, guarantee that it's a safe environment. As the coach, do a composite of the feedback so it can't be traced back to anybody. Those are very concrete things you can do that are totally dependent on that context, and they can be night or day. Think about your next retro, and if you didn't have that, you'd probably just say, hey, sailboat's a good one to do, right? Or whatever, right? Is that fair? That's a sort of, but that's a good.
Makes a total difference. I get what you're meaning by context. And
Yeah.
that makes a lot of sense to me.
Thanks. Yeah, and as I go through some of the examples here for the VMO, I'll go through them pretty quickly in the interest of time, but I'll talk through them. I just do screen caps. So what you'll see here, by the way, is not theoretical. These are real prompts and real responses. So high level, I'm going to zoom through this quickly. We'll have this, I'll share a PDF of this afterwards, but this is guidance again that is irrespective of today's content, just general care and feeding or driver's instructions or user manual, whatever you want to use. But understanding the role, and it doesn't have to be who you are. If I'm a consultant, but I want to be the role of a software engineering manager, specify the role. Audience. So that's who I am pretending to be. I'm cosplaying on my side of this, I guess. Who's the audience? Who am I? Who is the persona? Who is going to be on the receiving end of that? One individual, group, whatever that is. But the same way that a good user story as a same idea. Who is the A? Here's the context here. So general terms, if you're addressing a problem, gap, opportunity, etc., I don't think that there's a right answer, although err on the side of more. I find that that's really helpful. So my example here in this generic one is we're always hitting our due dates or we struggle with capacity. That context about why I missed a delivery date for an initiative matters. Are we over capacity? Do we just not manage our things well? It'll help guide the answers. So it's useful for precision, and we want precision, especially because they still do hallucinate. I fight with ChatGPT like it's a bad relationship every single day, about on the hour. But the more precision we have, the more we're going to get better answers. Format. So how you want the results. Now it's, since I created the slide first time around, you can specify artifacts and it'll generate them. They're not wonderful, but templates, generate a docx, generate a PDF. I'm generating assessments now and feeding them into Microsoft Forms, which is a different session for a different day. But that I finally got that down and it's awesome. Works quite well. And then length. So explicit numeric constraints don't always work. I've ChatGPT has told me 3 times today it gave me 27 slides and it provided 10. And every single time, including the 3 follow-ups. So just your mileage may vary, but expect to have an interaction. But specify length. You can say half a page, whatever number of words, whatever that is. But provide that. Otherwise, you'll generally get too much or too little. So with that, I'm going to jump right into this is going to be the kickstart of all kickstarts as far as the first 90 days of what is a very large move. But it at least will give you some ideas of how to use these tools. But as part of it, I'm also going to give all of you across those 90 days for each of these 3 phases, 4 of the key elements of starting your VMO. So I hope that that's helpful. It is linear, or at least this is structured to be linear. But again, the idea is that in a medium-sized org, if you have the right level of support and agency and control, autonomy, whatever the right word is for you, you can do this. And even if you can't, what I would say is there's probably some things that I'll cover today that either you want to do or that you might find to be worthy of some further discussion and dialogue. You may be able to use one of these pieces, even if you don't want to roll a VMO or work to establish your Agile PMO, VMO. Some of these constructs are useful irrespective of that. So with that, we're going to jump right in. Engaging stakeholders, right? So don't have to have a VMO for that. Generative AI can be really helpful to help analyze stakeholder influence and allow you to generate very specific engagement plans and to craft things like email campaigns. So again, not just for the VMO, it's really helpful in creating role-specific engagement approaches. Defining vision and OKRs, that's a superpower. Everyone's on the OKR bandwagon now, which is awesome because I have been as well, and it is a really valuable construct. It can help you. That is one great use case for generative AI from my experience. It's really good at ideating OKRs, especially if the problems you're trying to solve are relatively not generic, but common. It can help with value stream mapping. So I don't know if you do value stream mapping today. That's sort of an advanced topic. So, but it can help with understanding the value streams rather than just the teams, especially if you are having team members assigned as resources. Understanding your value streams are really important because those of us in Agile ways of working want to look at how our work is flowing, right? So understanding our value streams. Whether or not you build out a VMO, that's something that's really helpful to understand your value streams and where you have issues with Muda, where you have issues with waste. And then selecting tools. So all of these things, if you look at it, can be independently valuable, even if you're not rolling out a VMO or an Agile PMO. For whatever reason, if this is interesting to you and you want to go to the deeper version of this, I have a 3-part series that is recorded of this that expands out each of these sections. It's available on YouTube. I'm happy to share the links, but there is a 3-part series aligned with each of these 3 modules. In the interest of our time, I'm going to go through just one of these examples for each phase. So engaging stakeholders. So here we go again with the context word, but the more detailed, the better. So this is a prompt, right? And it's an extensive one. And I will also say I had it tell me how to improve my own prompt. So it's a little bit meta, and I don't mean Mark Zuckerberg. You can tell it how to improve your prompts and have some suggestions, but you're an expert in lean portfolio management and adaptive governance, blah, 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 blah. Help me design a stakeholder engagement and management strategy for the first 30 days. But that's when I say context. Again, I know that term is sort of ambiguous. That was not my intent. But that's what I mean is 30 days, launching a VMO. Here's who I am. I want to do LPM, adaptive governance, but I also added some of my own stuff for these scenarios within an enterprise setting for a regional credit union on the West Coast. So that means I'm not US Bank, Bank of America, JP Morgan Chase. That sometimes will make a big difference in terms of what that would look like. If I was doing this for a Fortune 200 company, this would be a different plan. So I provided a comprehensive step-by-step plan. I'll get all these prompts to you, by the way. But this is a really, really, really long prompt with a bunch of these chained ideas attached to it. But you can see I've asked for all of this. I've asked for the plan, but I've been very specific about what I want. This is really long, but it was very detailed. Like I said, I don't think it's cheating to use the tool better, but I asked for help to improve the prompt. And so this is what it provided back. And I'm pretty happy with the results. I iterated a little bit, but not too much. But other than the emoji, which I have a generalized allergy to, you can tell if not use emoji, by the way. But here's my 30-day stakeholder engagement and management strategy plan. It provides the contextual considerations up on top. And then it goes through and it talks about those different groups, their level of influence, lean agile alignment, stakeholder groups. Like this was part of the initial response. So that ridiculously long prompt got me some really high quality information in response as well. I actually have a multi-level artifact that's coming out of this. And it just keeps going. So what's the cadence? So I didn't ask for all of these. How frequently should I do it? Who, why? It built all of this stuff out for me based on that prompt and then gave me ideas. Again, all of this came back in that one response from that one really long prompt, but you can see how detailed it is. It gave me everything I asked for. I may not do all of these things. I may not agree with all of them, but if it gets me somewhere between, let's just say 50 to 95% the way done, how good is that? And it also helps me to be more objective for some things like this. If I've done this a bunch of times, maybe I forget something, or maybe I should be forgetting something. Those are the sorts of things that I find it helpful. So that is what it did with a little bit of upfront work and understanding how to really prompt properly. This is what I got. So that was pretty cool. And this is, again, doesn't have to be for your VMO. That same approach with some tweaks to that prompt. Maybe you've got a new initiative that involves organizational change management. You want to know who those stakeholders are. Same idea works. So any questions or thoughts on any of that? I think that's that was the last for that first 30 days. Nope. Cool. All right. So again, in the broader version of this, I go through one example in detail for each of the 4 items for each of the phases. So a total of 12. I'm only choosing one of them for the sake of time. The next 30 days, in that period, we form teams. So as we're moving towards this structure, especially for a lot of organizations that have a traditional PMO, we have to change the teams, we have to change the structure, we have to change the roles. A lot of organizations are now moving towards a product model, product operating model. Thanks, Marty Kagan and team. But now we also have to have product teams, shared services teams, et cetera. So some of those things are new. We need some help to see what do we need to do when we're forming teams. Setting up lean portfolio management. That in and of itself could be a full-on multi-stage conversation, but that's really key. Whether or not you have a VMO, LPM is incredibly valuable for portfolio management in a good way. If you're not familiar with it, that may be a topic for a different speaker on a different day, but that is very, very important at the portfolio level. How do we get started with that? LPM is hard. It's really valuable. It's not easy. Designing a governance framework. So if we're moving away from a PMO, a lot of organizations that I work with, they still keep a lot of the residue from the old PMO, and it's like we're agile, so we don't have any rules. We all know that that's never been true, but that's the rep that we have. Yeah, I know that, right? Everyone here, it's like this is like a support group, right? But I mean, the reality is like we do have documentation, we do have requirements, we do planning, like promise, but it looks different, and we have governance, and our governance looks different. So as we're moving towards this, let's make sure that we don't lose governance. We want lightweight governance. We want meaningful governance, but we're not getting rid of governance in this new APMO or VMO. So what does that look like? And that's a very concrete, specific thing. And then plan for your first big room / PI / mid-range planning. I use like 8 different labels because different people call it different things. But if you're going to do, big room planning, or something under a different name that is bringing everybody together and zooming out a little bit. If you've never done that before, it can be overwhelming. If you've done it a lot of times before, it still can be overwhelming, but even more so if you've never done it before. So I chose to set up LPM out of those 4 options. And so I really like the idea of using LPM and generative AI helping us with implementing things like the prioritization framework for WSGIF. Familiar with WSGIF? I'll pause for a minute. It's okay if you're not. It's a really hard acronym to say, which is why I think it's not popular. Because WSGIF sounds funny and it's like all
I
um,
don't think I've heard WSGIF before.
okay. It's all
I'll see.
consonants too, so it's yeah, it's so WSGIF is a great thing that has a bad name or a difficult name. Weighted shortest job first. I'm enunciating not for effect. I just have to say it that way, otherwise I don't say it right. Um, but what I did is some of the prior exercises, I was able to start taking a look at the MVPs or MMPs. We think about these as epics that could be done within a month. If you haven't done big room planning, just think of it as epics that actually provide value to people when they're done. That chunk of work, if we have like an epic hypothesis, if you're familiar with scaled agile, this will make sense. But an MVP and MMP, we want to do something in less than a quarter that our customers can benefit from. That's not just what we do every sprint, right? That's my version of what this is. But in lean portfolio management, whether you have a VMO or not, you can use this construct. So WSGIF is a very simple but powerful technique for prioritization at the epic level. You can use it at other levels, but it's too much work to do at the minutia. But I find it very valuable at the epic level. And you can have generative AI tools, whichever one you choose, simulate prioritization scenarios based on real-time data input as well. But if we don't have that data to put in there, even for this, there's a bit in the screen capture, you can see the math. It seems, honestly, that even looks more intimidating than it really is. It's grade school, like early grade school math. But it's a little bit more than just ROI. At least it's a more thoughtful way to do ROI. So if you're not familiar with WSGIF, it is a numeric score where you rate, but you compare the same way that we look in a backlog. We're comparing using Fibonacci usually. We're comparing one item amongst other items for relative priority. The idea of doing it at the epic level is attaching some quantification towards the thing that's been really hard for us to do forever, right? Which is what's the business value of a story relative to the business value of another story? What's the business value of remediating a publicly exploited vulnerability in my code? Business value, other than staying in business, is probably low. WSGIF has some additional factors. Thank you for laughing at my sometimes not so serious joke. It's like, well, business value, like, well, being employed is valuable to me. I'd like to continue that. But joking aside, WSGIF is just a couple more factors. You add up three things for the return on value part, a return on investment. And the return normally is just what's my business value. WSGIF has three other factors, and I don't think they're on the next slide. Let me just double check. If not, I'll just talk through. Oh, I did. Okay, cool. So in this table, I'm going to narrate it a little bit more detail. If you haven't used WSGIF before, it'll help you with it, by the way, which is what you're seeing right here. So it did a reminder. It wasn't intentional for this session, but what the math is of WSGIF. But WSGIF, with these epics, we compare one against the other the same way that we would compare stories in our backlog about which one needs to come first, right? And it's not just always the business value. There's other reasons sometimes, including the smallest one, and that's where the shortest job first comes in. As a reminder, even something that's small in business value, but we can do in a day and our customer gets some benefit of it, even if it's this, not this, if they can benefit tomorrow from a real change, the fact that the context of time is in there is what's very new about this construct for me. So the idea of user business value, that first column, each of these epics we're comparing against one another, generally using a modified Fibonacci that we'd use. I don't know where you all stop. I normally say 8 is my top, 13 is a yield sign at best, but I won't go. Anyway, all teams, you do it differently, but if you have 100, let's talk, but not now. But if you use this, I think up to 8 is what I normally will do. That same Fibonacci works here at the epic level because we're comparing these epics, these features to one another through this mechanism. WSGIF is just this framework. User business value, we say relative to the other ones, that was a 1. How does everything else compare to this, right? That relative comparison that you use, same idea at the epic level. Time criticality, right? So if I was BlackBerry 15 years ago, the time criticality of changing my approach to how my device worked might have kept me as an ongoing concern. That's time criticality, as just a really severe example. Nokia is another one. There's some others that are out there that missed the boat. Not that they didn't have good ideas, but they didn't have the idea of what happens in the marketplace if we don't address this. Security vulnerabilities go into that as well, as they can for risk reduction or opportunity enablement. So those 3 things get summed together, back to the grade school math, and then they're divided by a Fibonacci the same way that we estimate stories. You do the same thing. You compare those epics, relative level of complexity and size derived through that. And you just divide them. And now you have a prioritized, objective way that you can actually rate the priorities of the items that are competing. That's how we can start with lean portfolio management, is that we can say the items that are at the top of our backlog for our portfolio are the ones that had the highest WSGIF score. And generative AI can help us with that in terms of a variety of things. Now, here's an area where I will make a very large caveat. The tool doesn't have the context, especially in my examples. So I see Kathy's smiling, right? So that's where you could add some context. Here's what our 5-year organizational, not IT, but our 5-year institutional organizational strategy is. There's things that you can add from a context perspective that will help with this. But when it presented to me in its response without that context, I had very aggressively mixed emotions. 1, thanks for doing this. 2, those numbers are based on sort of the general universe, not my specific context. So they may be a good starting point to look at, but they don't really know, like customer self-service portal. In our industry, is that something? I was in an insurance company within the last decade, I'll just say, that didn't have a portal when I got there as the CIO, and going, how is that possible? That was a competitive disadvantage. The system wouldn't have context of that, but I would say time criticality, like we're not going to be in business because we won't get business from this. Those are the sorts of things that you can provide that context, but again, you're the humans in the loop. You need to make sure that you're providing that right level of oversight, especially for things related to your own context. And that's where that term being used can be a little bit ambiguous, right? So there's Kathy, and I don't know, I'm not just calling on you, but if that makes sense, there's a lot of context that will help us, excuse me, better understand how to apply some of these things. But there are also some instances where even if I put all the context in the world in this, I wouldn't take these numbers prima facie, sorry, I'm using lawyerly terms, on its face. I wouldn't take those numbers at that point, but I would say, okay, that's an interesting starting point. And then there's some bias that's in there because it did the starting number, but it may be a good place to start if you're overwhelmed by saying, I have no idea which of these might be more important, for example, for user or business value. If you're working in an industry where there's a lot of data that's available, it's not that difficult. If you're in a niche industry or a niche organization, those really small things, you'll want to check the data a little bit more. But I think that it's at least a good place to get started. Again, especially if you don't know how or where to get started, it's really helpful there. Pause for a moment. Any thoughts or questions on all of that? Jeremy? Nope.
I've got one.
Okay.
And I've been working for a consulting agency who's promoting GenAI use, and a bunch of my colleagues are making use of it. And this is some fairly sophisticated output that we're seeing, which is really, really interesting. And it does make me more curious to push beyond what I've done with it before. But also what's occurring to me is, did you need a bot to tell you how to make a WSDIF scoring matrix? Like if you see the WSDIF framework, then you know what the scoring matrix looks like. And
Oh
the
yeah, yeah.
numbers need to come from your business partners. That's the hard part, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And you're exactly right. And that's why I'm saying, like, if it does the math for you, like the score itself is like grade school math.
Sure.
But like with anything else, it's always interesting, right? Because the numbers are a quantitative interpretation of a subjective opinion,
Yeah.
right? Which is, I
So
think, is
like the interesting part is going to be getting the key stakeholders in the room and letting them argue over whether or not thing number 2 is an 8 or a 7, right? In business value. Like, and then they spend 10 minutes discussing whether or not it's an 8 or a 7.
yeah. And I think exactly like these that don't use these as the final numbers, either the ones in step 4 or step 3. But especially if you don't know where to start, if you're not sure how to start, if you want to do some priming, again, there's bias that's going to be introduced. When I've started WSGIF with teams that have never seen it before, the flip side of that is I have literally spent almost an hour in a meeting talking about, I don't know if we got through all 3 of those factors for one epic.
Yeah,
the first time they did it. So there's pros and cons of seeding that process. But I do think in some instances it can be helpful to get us started and to say, we know these numbers are wrong, but they're at least something to respond to, for example. And also, your mileage may vary dramatically. If you look in these examples and the example I provided, the idea for what I'll call largely commoditized industries. If I'm a financial services organization, the broader interwebs have a very good, and the language models that incorporate the information about them, they're going to know a lot about what financial services organizations that do consumer-based lending and those sorts of entities. They're going to know things like, do I need a customer service, customer self-service portal? So if I've provided that list of those epics, which I did, if they're reasonably well labeled, it's first guess at the relative value of those items that I'm saying I haven't done yet. I think that there's some good data that we can get out of them. Again, if they're largely well-established industries or domains where there's enough data in the model to do that. Does that make sense? Whether or not you agree?
It does. It does. I think a lot of my fear would be around anchoring bias, and then,
Agreed.
and especially around the efforts. If the bots tell you, well, the bot said that was a 2. Why are you guys saying it's a 7? It's like, well, the bot doesn't know the first thing about our actual systems. The bot just put a number in there.
Yeah. There's a couple techniques. So either before or afterwards. So like what I would say, to see if this helps, like 1, experiment with it, but 2, like provide context. So if we're building this on mainframe, we've got a COBOL system, we've got abstraction layers in the middle. Our software engineers are largely offshored, commoditized, not great, but not awful behavior, but we cycle them out every 6 to 12 months. So the code base, no, I mean, I think, yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to hit a nerve there. But that's context, right? So, yeah, sorry, you know that it's not theoretical, I know of which I speak. But that said, that context, if I was doing this, like I would say, like I got this, I would also say, these numbers are based on a generalized understanding of their value. Here's some context for my organization. First of all, this particular area is a competitive disadvantage for us right now. The reason that we're going to do this rewrite is that we have performance issues. That sort of context then can be woven by its responses into the like time criticality, right? This system is on a deprecated version of whatever. I'm going a little bit deep here, but before or after, like if you don't get a good response, provide some more context. I agree with you, and I was going to say I don't know how to get past the bias. I have one way that I will just throw out there that you may not even want to consider. that I do sometimes, which is I have it generated for me and I don't share it with anybody until after they put in their scores.
Oh,
And
that's
then I do an unhide of a column in Excel.
yeah.
So
Intriguing.
there's some techniques to not bias, but to balance that again, WizGIF, if people are doing it a lot and you've got people who are in it and committed to doing it the right way, you're good. The flip side of this, I'll just say, and sort of leave this in a positive way, is it also can provide some objectivity. So I don't know about your experiences, but for me, the biggest problems with implementing prioritization frameworks like this, what we think of as a feature, other people implicitly think of as a bug, which is I don't get, because of my title, to choose what's number one and say it's really, 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 really valuable. And I said really 5 times, which means it's the number one. This can say, well, relatively speaking, it seems like the other ones are higher. Being able to articulate and advocate. But this bakes in some level of objectivity, and that's another implicit. I don't think I call it out explicitly here. It's a superpower of generative AI to make things more objective when there is inherent subjectivity. What people work on and where you spend your money on what projects or initiatives, that tends to be a highly subjective and often emotional and political thing. And if you find that in your organization, even if these numbers are wrong, it might be a good way of saying that thing you thought was a 1 was an 8. Same way as when we do estimation. Nobody's right or wrong, but talk to me about what your assumptions are. Same idea. So I'll just close with that. But if you need to basically have an objective partner in this, that is a scenario where it's like, even if it's wrong, at least it's not wrong because it wants to be, because it has a stake in the outcome. You know what I mean? So at least you're wrong unintentionally. You don't have an agenda. Is that good? I know we're getting like I've gone kind of deep on this, but the conversation is way more meaningful than all of the PowerPoint slides that I will sacrifice at the altar of good conversation. So thank you for jumping in and stay off mute. I'll go through this just a little bit more. It talks about using WizGIF and for LPM, so just a little bit more guidance. Again, with the idea of I'm new at this. If you're not new at this, change your prompts back to the idea of the persona. Who am I? You all are experts. You don't have to do the training wheels version, but you may be working with someone who needs it. Same chat, do another prompt with that language and it'll reframe it pretty dramatically. You can see some more stuff there related to what we just talked about, but automated scoring recommendations. So they're not decisions, but let's plop some customer sentiment in there. Other context, back to that context word, those sorts of things, and also scenario modeling. So this is another example where you can use this of scenario, different scenarios. So not the Monte Carlo, but the idea of saying, give me some things like if we care about getting more customers and we're less concerned about profitability, or we want to keep our team members because culture is awful, you can provide that context as well. So help with scenario modeling. It gave me this option, and then it gave a bunch of different scenarios that could be applied based on those different sort of strategic areas. Again, if I provided that at the beginning and said strategically, we just want, to increase the number of users, we're not concerned about profitability so much right now, you could provide that at the beginning or afterwards, or just give me different scenarios based on this being the highest thing. Does that make sense? So go ahead, Kathy, I think you're about to say something.
Yeah, I have a question. This is just one of the things that I always deal with when I'm doing these kind of things with people, and I'm just curious how you deal with it. So you see this, right? Now, whether we believe it or not, whether we have, we can look and go, well, that doesn't seem quite right. Let's do some more, prompt revision, or let's get other people to say things. So, but I think when people see these, when executives see these things, and it seems like it came from the internet, even though everyone's really smart, how do you deal with not having people think, well, now this is the law? Like for me, this is an experimentation. We'd have to go do some, we'd have to go put the things in place to check it out, like have those metrics, have those things, like, is it doing what we want? Do we need to run the simulation again? But I just find so much of management is so busy that they're like, okay, great, that's the promise. It's done by Harry, blah, blah, blah. We're selling it. We're done. how have you how do you help people with that? Or have you
Yeah,
found that? I might be the only one. I don't know.
no, I think that I think that I've got the question right. But please correct me. So there is I love the fact that we're all talking about biases. Not that we have them, but that we're acknowledging that we have them. So in this context, how do we avoid using the inherent bias that people have of, hey, came from a machine, must be perfect. And I will say, before I say some things that I think might be okay, I will say one of the biggest challenges that I see with these tools in general that I don't have a great answer for, other than you can tell it to not do this, is don't anthropomorphize. So I think there is an inherent danger in maybe even complementary or the opposite of what you said. My scenario is, and it's a tough needle to thread, or tough to thread that needle, if I get that right. Because it gives the veneer of a human expert. You hit a web page and you're like, well, it may be pretty, but I know this is bunk. But when it anthropomorphizes as an expert, and there's a couple of bad jokes that I always make, like it's just, I mean, I've been that guy. I will just say, I usually say, like, it's like talking to a guy, but like talking to like me particularly, I'm confident and wrong a lot. Like, you should question some things that I say. And we all know people like that. I try to not be that guy anymore, but I know that I have been. But the tool is like that all the time. Like the pizza on glue thing or glue on pizza that Gemini did. Like, when it's wrong, there's no humility whatsoever. It's not like, well, I didn't understand you, but I'm gonna think that this is maybe what you meant, or better yet, hey, that makes no sense. Like, that's a bad idea. Could you try that again? So that side of it is one that I have to caution of saying, even for myself, that's an area of risk. The flip side of that, of taking this output and having people be attached to it, some techniques, and I don't know just if this is helpful or not. One is, I'm doing the screen caps because I hate it when people do PowerPoints that aren't actual real. Like, I do it real time if again, the results were reliable, but I do real screen caps. So you see, that's a real prompt. That's a real output from that real prompt. Like, there's no smoke and mirrors here. What you can do though is, like, when I do WizGIF, I don't bring anything that you see on screen up here. I bring up an Excel workbook that I use specifically for this purpose. I paste the epics in. I hide all of the columns except the one we're talking about. I do low res, low tech, so we don't get infatuated with it. What I would say, if you want to try something like this, is to keep it on a separate tab, which I also have done. So like on a baking show, you don't have time to bake it during the show. So I have two ovens. You know what I'm talking about, right? Hey, oh, now the oven, here's what the cake looks like. So there's some techniques like that. If you want to show those results, but to not bias, like what Alex was saying, and combine what you're saying, have those things in your role as experts, as facilitators, as orchestrators. You can have those things set aside and figure out if or when you want to do the big reveal. You don't have to use it as a bias. Like I said, for me, having something that wasn't a blank slate in one instance was really valuable, because even if the numbers were wrong, people could wrap their heads around it in their own context with real world examples. But just like the same thing with user stories, now it's just like, where do you disagree? Oh, that's an 8. That's not an 8. Okay, why? Nobody's wrong. It's the conversation that's really important, right? And I don't think, I'm sorry, I was about to do double negative. You still can have the conversation even if you bias it. There's just pros and cons to that. Does that help at all?
It does. I actually was talking about something kind of like, let's go. We've done this. We've agreed at least on an initial ordering,
Okay.
and then
For the WizJeff, you mean? So they've gone through the exercise
yeah,
manually.
we've gone through the
Got
exercise.
it. Okay.
And now we
Sorry.
have this order,
Right.
and people get attached to the order. They think the order is right, rather than the order is right for right now until we do some work and then reevaluate. So, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's what I was kind of thinking. Like,
Got it.
there is ways that I help people kind of like, you need to reevaluate this. This isn't like you get to now go for 6 months. Like, and
Sure.
this is going to be it. But right, do you notice sometimes people just kind of like, no, we did that already. We don't have to think about that anymore.
Yeah, and totally agreed. And that's another like a bias thing. Like you can't unring that bell. That's why you don't put timelines with detail on a roadmap because it looks like a commitment, all of those things. That's why we use lo-fi mock-ups, right? You know you can't have this tomorrow because I drew it with a crayon. So what I don't know if I have a great immediate answer, at least not when involving generative AI. What you might want to do, whether or not you use Gen AI on this, I'm not entirely sure. I'm sure there's probably a purpose, but it may be not necessary. Would be to, upon whatever cadence that is. So if you're reviewing the monthly or quarterly, something that you could do with or without the help of generative AI is what's changed in our context that might inform our relative priority, market share. Do we have issues with whatever your domain is? When priorities change, with or without the help of generative AI, what I like to do is to say, again, a feature, not a bug. The fact that we've moved towards a different way of non-monolithic planning for our initiatives is specifically so that we can support the changes. And the only other thing that I do, and this has nothing to do with Gen AI, you can use or not use this. What I have found as a way to tell people that this is real and have them not ever argue is I say, what was your priority list in February of 2020? And then they say, what was your priority list in June of 2020? Were they the same? And you don't have to be a jerk like I am, right? You can say it in a more gentle way. But the reality is, if somebody says my priorities are immutable and they don't change, even if your priorities don't change, the market changes, tariffs, right? The world is changing whether or not. So I don't know. Forgive me because I'm not sure exactly how you want to weave Gen AI in, but as a technique,
It's the thinking.
I've been using the COVID reference, and it works really well to be like, or quote John Lennon, right? Plans are what plans are what happen. Life is what happens while you're making other plans. So I think that applies as well. So I don't know if that's helpful, but
I was
the
just wondering
COVID
if there was something in Gen AI that you used, right?
Yeah.
I understand, right?
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm taking us a little off track, but
Well, that was probably me more than you. As far as Gen AI, I don't think. Let me just bring it back home to your point. Unless you provide a lot of context, that's why I'm saying I'm not sure that Gen AI would help with something that people should be able to answer when you as a facilitator ask, which is, yeah, why have priorities changed? And fill in those values. I don't know that you need Gen AI. You could use it, but I don't think it's really the question of what has changed to support that. So anyway, I don't know if that's any more helpful, but that is my answer, and it tends to work. So we are really quickly, I'll go through this. I know we're probably way over time. Last one, phase 3, optimizing and scaling. The 4 key elements of rolling out the VMO. Start measuring what matters. Improve our improvement. So we all are fans of continuous improvement. Let's do that at scale. There's the picture of the kitten, by the way. I try to have that in every one, as you saw. So check that box. Shift the culture. So how do we scale this for organizations that still have elements where there is a lack of agility? If people are asking why our priority list hasn't changed, or why it has, or why it might, that's a cultural thing. How can we use these tools to help with that? And then scaling across value streams. So one of those, so tracking our value delivery, tracking metrics like cycle time, customer satisfaction, or return on investment for value streams, using Gen AI to automate metric reporting through dashboards that visualize progress in real time. So again, you can see that prompt, fairly long, act as a data analyst, specializing in agile metrics, talking about some of the metrics. I may not know these, so I could ask it, give me some ideas of what metrics might matter for lean. Don't just give me the Scrum metrics, by the way, like not all teams are Scrum teams. So providing that context, whatever you have, suggest visualizations that highlight progress towards business outcomes. So again, that level of detail is really important because I want to have this as a value-based approach. That's the V in the VMO. So it doesn't actually do all the work for me, but it identifies what those primary objectives are for the dashboard. New client onboarding value stream. So it has the context of who I am, my type of organization, and the client onboarding value stream is a high value stream, no pun intended. So it suggests some metrics. And cycle time, it shows what the metric is. It even provides suggestions on what visualizations I might consider when I'm building out my dashboard. So what data? How do I aggregate that data? How do I summarize that metric in a way that matters for my dashboard? What type of visualization? And then some other insights there, some things that reduction in onboarding duration. So we want to be able to not just have a dashboard that reflects how things are going, but we want to show what the impact has been and that the bad things there's less of and the good things there's more of. Throughput is another one, completed onboarding cases, so it provides a suggested metric, the frequency, month or sprint, and again, visualization there, flow efficiency, and then CSAT. So it's given me some good ideas of some things that if I don't have a dashboard right now, I can start with. If I do have a dashboard that I may want to modify as I move towards trying to measure things that matter for outcomes and value, less about the traditional iron triangle-y type things of how we look at projects. So very quickly through this, we are at, my clock says 9:52 because it's East Coast, but 6:52, don't worry, I didn't talk that long. Caution and caveats, ethical and compliance considerations, especially at scale, you're going to be dealing with some confidential stuff. Want to be very careful about that and all the alphabet soup of the compliance needs that you likely have. And also at the epic level, those are going to be some trade secret competitive advantage things. It's important. Talked about bias a lot. Bias amplification is something to just be very cognizant of. Work with InfoSec and compliance teams. You're going to need to do that anyway for governance reasons. And where appropriate, limit AI access to anonymized or non-sensitive data sets. Don't use this as an autopilot. Again, things that we've already touched on. You're still, each of you, me, and I've done this at least once and it was embarrassing, but I recovered. If you copy and paste, and it's bad, it's you. In this case, it was me. So even if you're not an expert, you're going to need to be able to make sure that those confident but wrong responses are corrected. So we want to make sure that we, especially at the strategic level, the stakes are higher, right? It's not just one user story or acceptance criteria. If we do mess up and copy paste the WSJF scores or whatever else, yeah, you can see that. Look, I see that on a couple of your faces. So we still need to be in charge. It's to help us, but they're our assistant, not the other way around. And it's certainly not, we're not their overlord where we're just like, oh, that's great. Perfect. You're an expert. So have these, at a minimum, these human checkpoints within the VMO processes to validate those outputs, especially on things that are strategically important. You have to be the person who works with the people to make sure that's accurate. And then change management. We've talked, the example I think that came up earlier, Kathy, yours, right? Because, AI is replacing my job. That's a whole different meeting as well, but there's perception and some reality of job displacement. If I'm an underwriter, there's some real world reasons to be concerned in an insurance company. But perception or reality, if you're rolling this out and you're working with people that are worried about using these tools, you already have an enemy who doesn't want to be an enemy, but your success is their failure. So proceed accordingly. But try to position it as it is, as a co-pilot. Do lots of AI literacy training, and generally you can do these in small doses. And have change champions so that people really understand that we're using these tools to help people be able to do the things that their heads and their hearts are uniquely human. That's always been my goal, is freeing them up to use their brains and their hearts. That's how we should be using these tools. And with that, I'll send this out. This is sort of a recap of things, but these specific items you can do to start rolling out your generative AI informed and guided and supported rollout of your Agile PMO, or as we say, VMO. That is it.